1998 Honda Civic. The fuel pump is located underneath the back seat. The back seat is held down by these 3 points. This point is a 10mm screw located between the seat belts. So once you disconnect that screw, then you got two hooks that you're going to need to maneuver around. After you disconnect those hooks, you can lift up this seat, get it out of the way, and access the fuel pump. We're going to relieve the fuel pressure with a 19 and a 17mm wrench. So under the hood, you're going to see this fuel filter, and at the top there's a nut. We'll use a cardboard box to shield the battery. As we disconnect the nut at the top, we're going to relieve some fuel pressure, and that's going to shoot a little bit of gasoline everywhere. So the cardboard's going to shield the battery, and once we dry all the gasoline off, we'll disconnect the battery. Maybe we should have done it in the reverse order. Maybe I should have disconnected the battery first. But this is how I did it, so you get what you get. Alright, now we've disconnected the battery, we've relieved the fuel pressure, we're all ready to disconnect the fuel pump. Alright, underneath this plate, we got two fuel lines that we'll need to disconnect. After that, we'll unplug this one, and there's another one that's underneath this rubber thing right here. And you got some 10mm nuts to remove. You're really going to want to vacuum and clean this area before you open up your fuel tank. I apologize, I didn't film the removal of the fuel pump. I got the fuel pump from O'Reilly's. So this rubber piece that they included did not actually fit, and I had to reuse the piece that came from Honda. So you may want to keep that in mind because mine didn't fit. And then also you're going to need to use a razor knife to cut this hose down to the right size. So when you're replacing the hose, just be aware that you're going to have to trim it down to size with a razor knife. Next, you got to press on a new filter or the old filter if you want to reuse it. And also this little clip, that's what holds it on down there, so you got to press that on with a pair of pliers or something, or a screwdriver. So we're almost done here. Now we just had to clip this electrical clip into the top of the pump, and it was helpful to have a little screwdriver around to unclip the old one. And also they provided these hose clamps for the fuel line, but I reused the old ones from Honda. I like these ones better. So I mean, it's up to you guys. You can use the hose clamps, or you could use the ones from Honda. It's up to you. So after I got that fuel pump installed, it was time to do the fuel injectors. I removed the air filter so that I could get better access to the fuel rail. And as you can see, I got the fuel rail loose. So I'll show you guys the connections. There's connected in a couple places down here. So these little bolts, that's the main place where the fuel rail is connected. So you remove a couple nuts on the back, and you got to unplug the fuel injectors. Once you got all four unplugged and you disconnect those bolts on the top of the fuel rail, I unplugged this sensor just to make more room because I had to disconnect this metal piece right here that was joining the fuel rail. I unclipped the wiring harness right here also so that I'd have more room to move around. Alright, so now that this stuff was freed up on this side, there's just a few more things to disconnect. So obviously when I disconnected the air box where the air filter is, I had to disconnect this ventilation right here. But next I wanted to disconnect my throttle cable because it was going to be in the way. So I undid this 10mm right in this spot, and I disconnected it here from the intake manifold so that it'd be out of the way. That way I could lay it to the side and move the fuel rail around without that cable being tight and in my way. The first thing that I noticed when I pulled the fuel rail out is that these fuel injectors were so dirty. I mean, I'm guessing that they were stuck open something was going on here because they're just so dirty, and obviously I needed to change my air filter, but yeah, I was definitely gonna have to clean on the inside there. You can see I got some shop towels to absorb the fuel that's about to shoot out of this thing when I disconnect it. All I'm doing is I'm holding tight to the fuel injector, I'm rotating it and pulling it gently. I'm trying not to get fuel to spray up in my face at the same time. So I'm just being careful. And honestly, this is the first time that I've done this with the fuel rail hooked up to the car. Usually when I do this, the engine's out of the car. Alright, so that was easy. And now I'm just inspecting the thing to try to understand how it works. Alright, so assembly is required. When you get the fuel injectors, you're going to have to put some little O-rings on there and a little rubber seal. Unfortunately, every time that I put one on, I would put my hands off frame, so we didn't get a very good shot of this, but I'm doing my best, guys. I apologize for the bad filming. Alright, now we're ready to install the new fuel injector. Just checking it to make sure everything's ready to go, and I'm gonna plug it in by forcing it in there. I gotta wiggle it just a little bit. It's really important that these seals and O-rings are seated properly, otherwise you're gonna have a fuel leak. Obviously you're gonna have to repeat the process 3 more times to get the job done. This is the part number from O'Reilly's Auto Parts. That's where I usually get my parts. Alright, now there's no way we're putting clean fuel injectors in a dirty intake manifold, so I'm gonna have to do something quick to clean these things out. I just decided to use a screwdriver to scrape the buildup. I was just flicking it out to the best of my ability. I just cleaned the entire inside, everything that I could reach, and I repeated this process all the way down the line. I cleaned all 4 intakes. Alright, so now I gotta grab the fuel rail and line up the fuel injectors with their holes, and when I try to press down to seat the fuel injectors, I gotta make sure that each ring is seated and is sealed properly so there's no air leaks. Now for the final inspection, everything looks like it's seated in place. I think I might have used a screwdriver or something to help me get those seals tapped all the way down into place. And now it's time to reconnect the 10mm nuts that hold the fuel rail down. We'll also need to plug in the fuel injectors. And I'll also have to remember to plug in that little sensor that I unplugged in the back, and connect that little metal rail that is helping the fuel rail stay in place. And of course there's one on the other side. So if you guys watch me assemble it, then you'll know how to disassemble it. Hopefully I showed everything that I had to disconnect. Now we're going to connect the throttle cable. So it had one connection here and 2 down here, and I got to remember to get that cable wrapped around in the proper position, otherwise the throttle is not even going to work. Alright, so now that we got that in place, now we can tighten down these 2 10mm. No problem. We gotta plug the wiring harness into the fuel injectors. You gotta be careful not to damage these wires when you're manipulating them around. All it's gonna take is one damaged wire on your wiring harness and you're not gonna know why your vehicle is running bad. Alright, now just a final review to make sure everything's plugged in and connected. Looks like we have all our bolts, all our clips, all our wires, all our lines, everything connected, and all that's left is the little air filter box up here, which honestly is a pain in the ass. So disconnecting and connecting this thing could be a real treat. This is the culprit right here. You got a 8mm. Once you get your box fitted on there, you got to connect this air line right here, and don't forget this sensor also. Plug in that sensor where you're gonna have a check engine light. Now it may help to use a little mirror like this to connect that 8mm down there, but honestly I found it to be much easier to use my phone on camera mode and then look at my screen. So here we are looking at my screen, and I'm using my phone right now as a camera and a light, and I'm looking at my screen to navigate around this 8mm that's on a Milwaukee automatic ratchet. And you know, the thing keeps wiggling around as I'm trying to turn it, so in the end I'm gonna have to get a screwdriver or some other tool behind there to support it and keep it in place while I try to tighten down that 8mm. As you can see, I got my tool, my pliers down here. I'm going to hold it in place while I use my ratchet. And my phone this whole time is being the best tool in the world because I'm able to look on camera at what's going on down here. There's no way you can see this with your eyes. So you're going to have to use some kind of mirror, some kind of light. It's a real pain. So here I am, I'm finally on the home stretch. It takes a minute for me to get this job done. Once I get this 8mm on here though, it's all downhill. All I need to do is get that little tool behind it to support. Come on, get... Alright, so we're going to reconnect the power to the fuel pump and test this car out. So I think this is the first time in this video that we're showing this plug right here being plugged in. We never showed it unplugged, but now you're getting a look at what it actually looks like under that rubber seal. And now we'll connect this other electrical plug and try to make sure that it has a nice tight seal so that we don't have any problems later. And there we are, all sealed up, ready to put the seat down. And we're going to test this car out. Alright, so using a 19 and a 17mm, I'm going to bleed whatever air is in the fuel system out, and then I'm going to check to see if we got flooded spark plugs. So the first thing I'll do, once again, is I'll use a cardboard box to shield the battery. I'm going to disconnect the nut on the top of the fuel filter, and we're going to bleed any air out of the fuel system that may be stopping the car from running. So once I loosen up this nut and I see a little bit of fuel come out, I'm going to go jump in the car. I'm going to turn the key just enough so that I can hear the fuel pump activate. You'll hear a slight sound, and you'll know that fuel is shooting out of the top of that thing. You'll probably see it through the dashboard. Fuel is going to shoot out of this thing. Now you'll know there's no air in the fuel system. But make sure you clean this mess up. You got to make sure that it dries out before you try to run your engine. You don't want to run your engine with a bunch of gasoline everywhere. So be careful when playing with gasoline like this. So I'm using an inch-pounds torque wrench. I think it's set at 120 inch-pounds. But I just basically want to make sure that this thing's tightened down. Don't want to over-tighten that. So in this case, the spark plugs were flooded. So I dried them out and I put them back in. And of course, we torqued these down with the same torque wrench. It's at 120 inch-pounds. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end of this video. Subscribe for more content. I got 5 cars that I'm working on right now. I got a Buick Regal from 1978. I got a Honda Civic SI. I got 2 regular Honda Civics that I drive all the time. And then I got a broke down Ford Ranger that I'm gonna fix, guys. So please subscribe to the content if you like this video, and check me out next time. Stay notified, guys, because I'm going to be putting out lots of videos. And until next time, this is Regal Civic, and I'm out.